Hello, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining and welcome to BRIC Animation, Visual Effects, and Gaming Pre-Apprentice Speaker Series. This speaker series from BRIC aims to provide early awareness and education about the variety of careers across the animation, visual effects, and gaming industries. Moi is Allison Mann. I'm the co-founder of the BRIC Foundation and a talent manager at Fourth Wall Management. And today I'm very excited to explore business side of entertainment with a panel of guests. Ellen, raise your hand. Give us a little wave. Norman, give us a little wave. I mean, makes sense. And Kara, raise your little. All right. So raise the roof. So I'm going to be moderating this amazing guests and panelists today. A little bit about my background. I'm not only a co-founder, but I come up from being an artist and then fell into the business side of our world. So as we talk about like the business of art in this and like that journey, I think a lot of us here on this panel have very kind of similar experiences. Hello from Oregon. And so for me, I ended up majoring in media management at Columbia College in Chicago, not even knowing that was a thing. I ended up becoming a creative recruiter. And it's not like when you're 7 years of age, you're like, you know what I want to be when I grow up? A creative recruiter. Like nobody ever says that. But there's a lot of pathways and jobs in our industry that we may not even think that there are opportunities to be. I think sometimes we don't have the exposure to know that, you know, in entertainment, we can be X, Y, and Z. And when we only see maybe directors or producers, kind of like the main kind of maybe singers of the band, lead singers of the band. So here today, we're going to explore kind of all these different opportunities. I'm going to have each one of our guests kind of talk about who they are, where they came from, their upbringing, why they chose the path that they did. And then we'll leave a few moments for some Q&A. So I'm going to go from my left side of my screen, and Norman, you're going to kick us off. And you're going to tell us a little bit about you and your background and what you do for a living and how you got to where you are.
Sure. So my name is Norman Pratt. I am CEO of Luminous Blue, which is an animation company that we started about 2 years ago. The studio has been producing series and films for kids ages 3 to 12, and we do it in the categories of preschool and in the categories of tweens. My background is I started out as an assistant at Disney a long time ago on the desk, which is basically doing schedules, calendars, everything related to, I guess you can say, sort of one's administration. And I worked with a gentleman who taught me quite a bit about the business of entertainment. His first task for me was to build the business plan for a new initiative within Disney, which involved a lot of PowerPoint slides and a lot of Excel spreadsheets and a lot of sort of business stuff, which quite honestly, I was completely creative. I was a film person when I was younger. I was making what were YouTube videos back in the 70s and 80s, which were just like basically 16mm films of myself dancing around to Disco Fever and to doing horror films that were stop motion. So I really didn't know very much about business at all. So sitting at that desk, working with that executive really kind of opened my eyes to the fact that there was a lot more to entertainment than just what you see typically as an output. And after working at Disney for a while, I had an opportunity to go work for Sony. And at Sony, I worked on a lot of big films. I worked on Minority Report. I worked on a whole bunch of films there. And then I moved over to DreamWorks after that. And my role in both at Sony and at DreamWorks was part of the Greenlight Committee, which is a really small group of people who are on the business side again, reviewing films to determine which films to make and which films not to make. And so I kind of went from being an assistant to a little bit of kind of a more meaningful part of the decision-making process of what to make and what not to make, both at Sony and at DreamWorks. And DreamWorks is where I got the bug for animation. And I worked very closely with Jeffrey Katzenberg, who's a fairly large executive in the animation space. And that's where I got super excited about just being in the digital space. But I had an opportunity from George Lucas to work with him at Lucasfilm. And at Lucasfilm, my role was basically to start up an animation division within Lucasfilm. So I kind of parlayed what I learned from Jeffrey, got to know George a little bit more, and then helped shape out his animation business. And then eventually went on to make games and work a little bit with Amazon on the Twitch side, and then kind of create my own company. And that's where the sort of tech entrepreneur label comes from. But anyway, that's sort of me in a nutshell. So if you have any questions, the most relevant stuff for you, I think, is I worked at Twitch. So I know XQC, I know Pokimane, if any of you like any of those streamers. And I know Star Wars very, very well. So ask me anything about the Star Wars universe. I'm completely absorbed in that. So those are the two things that I think I can anchor with you in terms of content that you may know today. So
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Ellen, punting to you.
Okay, hi. My name is Ellen Doherty. I'm the Chief Creative Officer at Fred Rogers Productions. I also have a cold, so you'll see me drinking tea throughout this thing, and coughing, possibly, hopefully not. So I oversee all of the content that we make at Fred Rogers Productions. Shows like Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, Odd Squad, Donkey Hodie, Alma's Way, and Peg Plus Cat. And this is a job that requires both creative, logistical, and business sensibilities to get everything done. Before this, I worked on another PBS Kids show called Cyber Chase. And before that, I did freelance stuff as a producer, mostly in kids, but also corporate videos, documentary stuff that paid the bills. And my first job was on a show called Reading Rainbow, where I was the assistant to the producers. And much like Norman was saying, like one of the great things to me about being an assistant was being in the room and hearing discussions, sitting with the producer and director on set and taking notes and hearing from everybody about what worked and what didn't and why. Just through the natural course of my being there and my job in that situation being to take down the notes of what everybody said and being able to learn from that. It was a real masterclass. So that was my first job as an assistant. And in high school, I think I wanted to write, but I thought journalism or advertising. College, I figured out TV, which is a longer story. And then I had to set about finding a job and all of that. But the idea of telling stories and of kids has been in there for a variety of reasons. But that's sort of, that's the top line, I'll say, for me.
Fantastic. Thank you. Last but not least, you're going to have mute yourself.
I'm in. I was waiting. Just in case my dogs misbehave in the background. That's always a possibility the minute they see me on screen. Hi, everybody. First of all, I'm sort of like fangirling over both of you guys because Ellen and Norman, because you guys have such super interesting backgrounds, and I'm obsessed with Daniel Tiger and Alma's Way and like so much stuff that Fred Rogers does. Like, just to me, that's like the pinnacle of kids entertainment. I had no idea where I was going to end up. Like I majored in English and government in college. As my dad said when I graduated, congratulations, kid, you have basically no marketable skills. And he wasn't wrong. I grew up back east and I went to college on the East Coast, and like entertainment wasn't really a thing. Like I didn't grow up hearing about it. Obviously, I watched a lot of TV and movies as a kid, but it wasn't anything that sort of was like a driver for me. And I never identified as creative at all. And my first job out of college, I worked for Simon & Schuster in New York in their publicity division. And sort of echoing what both Ellen and Norman said, like different environment, but being an assistant was such a valuable job, like working for the head of publicity and just seeing sort of like the nuts and bolts of like how books are pitched, how things go out, taking calls all the time. And even honestly, like we had this crazy line called the pub phone, which was a landline where sometimes it was, I mean, you got anyone from like a whack job looking for free books to like, people who were legitimately after hours calling looking for Den of Thieves when that was like the hot book. Um, and from the New York Times or whatever, and couriering things and doing it myself. Like sometimes there were no couriers, so I just packed it up and like zipped it across town on the subway. I ended up wanting to go to law school, oddly enough, because I needed a change and I thought it was like a good way to pivot into something else, but I thought that something else was actually going to be working for the Children's Defense Fund. So imagine like such a left turn at Albuquerque. I got out of law school in LA. I came home my first day and I said to my then boyfriend, now husband, I was like, what's entertainment law? And he's like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, all these people are talking about it. It's well, and he's like, please, most of them will never go into it. And I ended up meeting this woman who at the time was the head of TV business affairs at William Morris when it was WMA. And she recruited me to come intern for her for a semester. And that was sort of the beginning. And even then, I wasn't really quite sure it was my thing. And but I seriously got lucky along the way. Like I met a lot of interesting people. And I just sort of stayed in touch with people. And literally, it's a longer story for another time. But I literally got my first job as a lawyer at Disney, which is unheard of because usually they never hire anybody right out of law school. But it was sort of a situation where they couldn't find anybody to fill this role. It was a dynamics issue. I had no idea. I was walking in blind. I had no idea that they had hired 3 different people for this job before me. No one worked out. Um, and I was so jaded because I'd interviewed for so many jobs. I remember driving over the canyons and thinking, well, here I go. I mean, I've seen The Lion King. That was like my sole connection to animation. And I was like, I hope they don't quiz me on anything. But it was funny because it was literally like I came in super green. I knew nothing about anything. And they felt like I could fit in with the other personalities. And that was how I started. And I honestly fell in love with animation because of that first job. Like that was what started the journey for me.
Do you feel like, and I'll, start waving back to everybody else, but do you feel like there was a natural calling, if you think of yourself of that 8-year-old kid, like, and who now you've become as an adult? Do you feel that you see traces of like kind of a pattern of like, if I knew then what I knew now, like I've always would have been taking this path, or
Oh, for sure.
is
If
it
I
like,
had, yeah,
who are
no,
you as
like
a kid?
I grew up reading, like loving books, loving fairy tales, loving like, even and watching so many cartoons with my brothers and sisters, and just like loving, rewatching movies over and over again. Like yeah, now that I look back, it sort of all makes sense. But at the time, I had no vision whatsoever into it.
What type of child were you? Like, were you a type A, like needing things to be like just so? I feel like as being a lawyer, you know what I mean? There's a certain brain that you
Right.
need. Did you fight with
No,
people
I
all the
mean,
time? Did you argue with people? Like, what was
oh,
your?
that's funny. I mean, now we're going really deep, Allison. My siblings would probably say yes. No, I mean, I'm the oldest of four. So I think I was a little bit type A, but when you're the oldest of four, you also have to be a little bit more flexible because you're sharing space with so many siblings and like it was a little wild and loose in my house. Um, so yeah, I think, but I was always the organized one, right? Like I loved, and I was like I was self-driven. So like my parents never had to worry about my homework. They were worried about the other siblings, but not me. Like
Mm.
I was pretty like on top of things and driven and, all that. So yeah, I suppose to a certain extent, and I was a little bit mouthy and argumentative also, probably. But you know what's funny? I didn't go into this because of that. I ended up a lawyer because because I like to advocate. And one of the things that I like in between, I've sort of had a similar pattern to Norman, actually, like Disney, Sony, DreamWorks. I think we all kind of hop around to similar places at different times. I agree that Disney was like a masterclass for me in terms of working with amazingly bright people in different facets who like super brought me up in terms of like my knowledge base and even communication skills and expectations of other people. Um, But one of the things was in between, and you know this, Allison, but like in between, I freelanced, and whether it was freelancing for like small independent companies that didn't have business affairs, or actually doing representation like directors and writers, and especially children's book authors who I feel are really underrepresented largely in the industry. That was where I really that's where I really gelled in terms of, you know, like getting great deals, but also protecting talent, because I feel like talent largely, they're so creative, they should be focused on what they're good at. They shouldn't have to worry about the rest of, you know, the terms of their deals and what, you know, sort of what they're getting, and, you know, being treated fairly and equally.
Yeah, yeah. I always think like there's markers of like you're kind of born who you are, and like if you observe like certain things, it kind of leads you. It's almost like following the breadcrumbs of, and we'll talk about curiosity in a little bit, but like for myself, I am neurodiverse. Like I have dyslexia, I'm ADHD. And like as a kid, art was my love language. Like I was not an avid reader. Like it gave me anxiety. And I would have never, like as a kid, I always wanted to be in animation, but as an artist, I would have never thought a business side of things where I would have ended up. But I also worked retail. I loved sales. I loved the kill of like making a deal. Like, and I love like closing deals when I worked retail and like getting that commission. And then fast forward to being a recruiter where I can close deals, and then being a talent rep where I'm closing deals. It's like, and I'm in the arts. So it's like just observing of like, what are your strengths and what drives you, and kind of being self-aware, I think kind of leads you to opportunities if you yes and your way through your career and you don't close off kind of what could be, and you're not less stubborn. So like, Ellen, did you find that you kind of were able to pivot and see different opportunities and lead yourself to where you are today?
Yes. I mean, I don't know that I fully saw the path. I think that I've always kind of gone by curiosity. Like, is this interesting? My first two jobs were at the same company, the one that did Reading Rainbow. And after about 6-7 years, I was laid off and became a freelance producer and writer because I had to. And in that time period, it was a lot of like different kinds of jobs that would come up. They weren't always what I was looking for. But I took jobs that, you know, definitely fit with my skill set, but also things that were of interest, where it was like a documentary about an old movie star, but it was like, oh, my parents watched those movies and I liked him. I thought he was funny. So I was like, sure, I'll work on a documentary about Danny Kaye. And it was really interesting. And I learned a variety of skills that I wouldn't have thought I needed, like I didn't know. At that same company, I got to do some concert specials, which was not a thing that I thought I would do, but actually has come in handy in other places. And the person who hired me on the Danny Kaye documentary, I ended up hiring her about 6 years ago to do a documentary on Mr. Rogers for us. So it's like I took a job because the work and the work was interesting. My skills applied. I needed a job. I had to pay the rent, but like it was interesting, and I was engaged by the work. And because of that, it gave me experience that I was then able to draw on 20 years later, because we wanted to do something that was in that same kind of like profile documentary for PBS primetime. And I was like, oh, I've worked on something like that. I know how to do that, and I know who to hire to make a really awesome show. So it's sort of like, I think if you can make the next right choice, then you can get on a path, and the path may be curvy, but it feels good. Feels right.
Fills your bucket.
Yeah.
Yeah. Norman, who are you as a kid? You're muted. It's everyone.
Sorry about that.
Okay,
Okay, cool. So entertainment as a whole is magic. Okay. And I think that I think that when you have a talent or when you create something and it impacts other people, and it's this thing that is out there that is a connection between you and the person that is able to receive it. And what I found really, really interesting when I started out at Disney, and trust me, I was coming at it from everything is magic, is that I found the machine behind the magic. I discovered the things that actually you need to put together to make that thing that is magical. So like in today's world, you get onto YouTube or you get on someplace and you stream yourself and you get a big audience, a big following, or you end up being a star and selected by an agency, but you don't really know what's happening in terms of the creation process of making the magic behind the magic. Other than if you're streaming yourself, you kind of know how to set up your camera, who you need to ultimately influence. There's a whole mechanic behind that. But in entertainment, it's big. There are people that work in law. There are people that work in finance. There are people that work as representation. There are people that work as grips on sets and do construction. And it's this massive machine. And it is utterly fascinating to learn that beyond just creating the magic. It's something that drew me in the minute I was at Disney, where I kind of all of a sudden understood that for years and years and years, going back, hundreds of years, the whole film process and the whole process of making anything that's a moving picture started a long time ago and has compounded on itself and has a history and legacy that is really, really interesting to learn. And I think that's what drew me into the business side initially, was just being fascinated by all of these things that people have done in the past to make cell frames for a Disney animated still, which is so fascinating to me, and how a production accountant was somebody who really held the keys in an interesting way in terms of decisions that are made around how much to spend on various shows and projects. And there's so many cool places for you to jump into, if you kind of take a look behind the magic and learn kind of more of that system. So
That's
yeah.
awesome. What would you say, and I'm going to go back through, but what does your day-to-day look like? What is in your jobs and your careers, give us the high level of what you do on a day-to-day.
So for me, I'd say the most important thing for me day to day is to be a coach and to be a little bit of an inspiration for the people that I'm working with, and to be super positive. The environment right now for film and television is really tough in terms of sales of shows and films. It's just a kind of a blip. It happens occasionally, and you end up having to be very much a motivator during that time. But in terms of mechanically, a lot of what I do is budgets, schedules, coordinating with reps like Allison and other people to do packaging, which is how you attach, which means how you associate a writer, a director, a key animator or a production company to your project, so it's packaged, so it can be sold. And I do a lot of creative work in terms of just defining brands, helping work through scripts, giving notes, and kind of being more the eyes and ears and glue when things aren't able to come together otherwise. So that's my day-to-day.
What would you say is an entry-level job for if somebody was I am solely inspired by what I hear today, where can a human start for this path?
I think, honestly, Ellen articulated it really well. If you can find an assistant or an apprentice or an internship position working in an established studio, I think that will give you the best entryway into understanding sort of a little bit more of what I do. And the other route, which I don't recommend, but I think people do it anyway and become super successful, is go on your own and try it on your own and see what you can do. Meaning come up with a script, come up with a story, try to raise some home financing, shoot it on your own, do it through YouTube, do it through TikTok now, spend 30 minutes building your own social presence in a way that's connective. The challenge with that is you're gonna miss out on understanding the broader entertainment business. And you're going to be really, really beheld to your viewers, which aren't necessarily the happiest bunch sometimes, and aren't necessarily the bigger quadrants that you'd want with an entertainment project to begin with. They end up being super siloed in terms of just liking your specific content and not content in general. So that's kind of what I'd say.
Love it. Thank you. Ellen.
Okay, so day-to-day
You're-
first, right? Okay. Day-to-day is well, I have about 17 people in the production department at FRP. 7 report to me, 10 report to other people who report to me. So part of my job is just managing and checking in. Part of that is coaching and cheerleading and mentoring. I think mentoring should go right along with managing. A lot of places, I've had one class in being a manager at my last job that was pretty terrible. So it's a lot of learning on the job by what works and what doesn't, and by the mistakes that I've made and learning from them. So I put a lot of effort into the team and helping. If they're happy and doing awesome work, then everything works, because everybody on set should be able to, everybody on the team should be able to do their most awesome work. And if they do, then you're going to have a good show, because everybody is being able to contribute. Everyone is part of it and making it happen. So part of my job is working with the people that we have, also working with our collaborators on different shows. So sometimes that means business things and talking about the deal for a new season, talking about the structure of something, talking about when things go wrong on a production, and though you've had 97 plans, you need a 98th because a thing happened that nobody anticipated. So sometimes it's that troubleshooting. And then also reviewing creative materials, scripts, pitches, rough cuts, music, etc. So that's in every day somewhere. Working on the stuff that we have now, be it TV shows or games or short form content for social media or YouTube, as well as content that we're going to make in the future. So we have a bunch of projects that are in development. And so I'm working with the team on those. And again, it's strategic, it's creative, it's logistics and business and all of that, because it's like, it's one thing to have an idea, it's another thing to actually make it happen, and figuring out like what the partners are, as Norman was saying, about like who you can team up with to bring something to the screen. Any screen at this point is super challenging. Yeah, I think those are sort of the day-to-days. And then entry level, we have purposely, I structured each team to have a production assistant, all of whom have now been promoted to coordinators, but production assistant is our entry level. And it's not being like an administrative assistant to somebody, but it's being sort of administrative support and production support, logistical support on a series. And they work, in our case, with an associate producer or producer as the next tier, and then a supervising producer or co-EP as the like lead for FRP on a show. So each show has basically 3 people that are devoted to the TV side of it. And then on the games and interactive content, we have one person who oversees that, a producer, and then we have a PA and a coordinator there. So it's really, I think if you think about it, like the structure, it's just like you need different kinds of people to help at different points, right? To have different perspectives. And the great thing about any kind of assistant position is that you get to see lots of stuff and you get to ask questions. And that is crucial. We are an organization that is in the office 2 days a week. We have some people who are hybrid, so they're in the office like quarterly. But otherwise, most people are in 2 days a week, which gives everybody the chance to talk in person, but especially the more junior staff, to be able to have hallway conversations about, can I ask you about that thing you said in that meeting that time? And I think for me, as we've talked about in my current job and in prepping for this, the sort of looking at the job market now and the, you know, entry level work available now, the thing that I think is hardest is that there is so much remote work, because you have to be so intentional about every single interaction. And you have to really, you know, somebody who is more senior needs to leave space for junior people to be able to ask questions.
Mhm.
And that's super hard to do if everybody is on Zoom or on Slack or whatever your platform of choice is. You have to be super intentional about that. So if you have an opportunity to work in proximity with people, that's a really good thing. And that's a good opportunity to be able to really kind of learn and grow from those experiences. You get exposed to more.
Love it. Thank you for sharing. All right, Kara, you next.
So, a lot, I mean, so much of what Ellen said is applicable to me too, except like on a slightly different tangent, but I agree with the proximity factor. And one thing actually, you know, honestly, I was a little bit whiny about was when I started at Moonbug, we're in basically 5 days a week, four and maybe one from home optional. But one of the things I kind of complained about as one of the older members of the team was that we're an open bullpen, like, you know, concept kind of office. And at first I was like, oh my God, this is a lot, like, because it's just this big room and everyone's loud and the ping pong tables and all these things that I love, but I kind of did want like my own space. But I think actually one of the things that has really come out of that is an appreciation for the fact that um, I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm a little too accessible, but I think it's a good thing because it's broken down a lot of barriers. I think in a company where a lot of the employees are younger, I think that it might have been more intimidating to approach the head lawyer if I were in an office all the time. But because I'm just out on the floor with everybody, they feel like they can come up and ask questions, which has actually been great, like in terms of not just understanding their own roles, but also how everything kind of fits together. Especially at a company like Moonbug, where we're kind of startup-y still, even though we're owned by Candle Media, the vibe is very startup and kind of scrappy. And so that part's, I think, been an unexpected, you know, benefit of that, like sort of setup. Um,
Do you want to talk about like
day to
what
day.
Moonbug does in your
Oh,
day?
yeah.
Because
So Moonbug we're digital first. So we're so all of our IP lives on YouTube initially. And then the model is that so our two biggest, probably most recognizable worldwide IPs are Cocomelon and Blippi. We have others also that we developed, but those are probably the big two juggernauts. And they have spun off into like a variety of different we call it premium content. So like, for example, Cocomelon has Cocomelon Lane, which is currently three cycles or three seasons on Netflix. We have a movie deal with DreamWorks. But it's also spun out into a lot of different derivatives from the original Cocomelon. Blippi also, so Blippi, interestingly, is like, whereas Cocomelon's all live action, although we just launched our new Cocomelon Classroom, which is a live action model. Blippi started out live action because he's a real person with Mika, who's his sidekick and best friend. And there are animated versions of Blippi, but primarily Blippi is all live action adventures. And he has he had Blippi's Treehouse on Amazon. We're now shooting Blippi's Job Show for Netflix. So my day-to-day is a lot like Ellen's in some ways. I mean, it's a lot of problem solving and no 2 days are ever the same, which I love actually. I mean, some days are crazy, and at the end, I'm like, what did I really accomplish? But for the most part, I love this sort of unanticipated, you know, somebody's about the dog. The unanticipated sort of where are things going and what am I facing when I'm walking in today? So there's a lot of like negotiating, drafting, there's like the nuts and bolts of being a lawyer, but then there's also a ton of like unanticipated, well, there's strategic stuff on the top end. There's bigger deals that we're working on with partner companies and, you know, new projects and new collaborations. But then I also work, it's soup to nuts. So it's starting with the development team, creative, production, and then music and marketing, all of it together all the time, every day is sort of, you know, sort of what it looks like, I guess. And you just, yeah, you just never really know what's going to come at you next.
What would you say are some ingredients to success? I mean, I think one of the things you just mentioned is like all these people you're working with, the collaboration, but like talk about, what are kind of some anchors to be successful in our space?
I think being one of the most important things is that, I mean, I feel like things are always changing, and just being open to that, and also admitting what you don't know. Like I mean, I came into this job 3 years ago, and I've learned so much about, I knew nothing about YouTube essentially when I came into it, to be honest. But just like how like production models and the way I grew up at Disney, I mean, that still exists, sort of how we made things. I was in feature animation and it was very traditional, but like there are just so many different avenues, like Norman said too, of like starting and doing things yourself, and how projects find you. And I think part of the what makes somebody successful, in at least in my environment and my role, is just being trying to be calm all the time, like, and not panicking, like, because there are going to be problems that pop up and you don't necessarily know how to solve them, but it's about kind of recognizing, like, pulling apart the yarn snarl and sort of sifting through that and figuring out like who might be helpful, who might be helpful, how do you break it down, like how do you break it down a problem into component parts and start to approach it that way.
Awesome. Thank you. Ellen, what do you think?
Well, I love the visual of the yarn snarl because that is it's just like what happened, but teasing that out. But I think the perseverance side of it, and failure is something we've talked about. I think well, first of all, resilience is crucial, especially if you do any freelancing, because there are ups and downs, and the downs can be down, and the ups can be amazing, but there are ups and downs. And the good thing about resilience is that it is a skill that can be learned. It is not something that you are just born with. It is something you can figure out. Lots of this is the subject of Don Quixote, which is a series we have for preschoolers on PBS Kids, but the messages apply across the board at any age. And I think that, when I said, talk about the yarn snarl, talk about my 97 plans, and now you got to make a 98th or a 99th. It's like, that's because things failed, it's like, it is not a question of will I fail? I will. I will not anticipate the right something will zag when I thought it was going to zig. Something like, things go wrong. The problem isn't, do they go wrong? The problem is, what do I do? The question is, what do I do with it? And can I fix it? Can I learn from it? Can I grow from it? Can the team, like, how do we come out stronger? And that's always the thing. Like, I had a roommate when I was like 24 who was really stressed about failing, and she would come home and be like, oh my God, I did this thing and my boss is going to be so mad at me. And she would just spin about it. And it was a really interesting contrast for me, because I was just like, I hadn't really thought about that as like a character trait, as something that I didn't do. But I was like, wow, I'm really glad I don't do that. And trying to help her with it. But it's like, truly, like, I don't even know. Like, it was just something that she was in her. And I think she eventually got over, but really was very core to her identity in her early 20s, at least. And so to kind of be aware of what you do when something goes wrong and how you can handle it, keeping calm, as Kara said, crucial. People, when I was that age, people said I was unflappable. I'm a little more flappable now, but I try to be as unflappable as possible. But like, things are going to go wrong. That's just life. So you got to be able to figure out what to do next and how to move on from there, and how to still have success, or know when to call it. If something isn't working, knowing when to say, nope, we're out, is a good thing too.
Kind of being able to rise above or learn, and I think we talked about it a little yesterday around failure, that failure isn't really failure, right? It's just an opportunity to gain knowledge, and it kind of carries you through.
Yeah.
I really feel for your, what was it, your roommate?
Yeah.
Yeah, when I first started at Nickelodeon, I was always worried that I was going to do something wrong to the point where my boss had to have a code word with me to be like, you're doing it, like, because I would always be like, am I doing this right? Am I okay? Like, and so we came up, I think it was like pineapple. So I would start doing it. She'd just shout pineapple at me and I would stop. So like finding that person that like, if you have those nervous tics or you're comfortable with somebody like kind of mentoring you and helping build up your confidence, like, and they can have a code word like pineapple with you, where if you're in a business meeting and feeling anxious, like it can kind of alleviate some of that pressure, because it's like, our world is definitely built on relationships and making sure that we're building them correctly, or, and then the what ifs, if I do something wrong, what does that outcome look like? And so I like a lot of what you were saying, Ellen and Cara, on those two aspects. Norman, what do you got for us?
All right, so my two things are very short. The first one is, this is an Amazon thing that I learned, and that is distill everything down to the next micro step. Because I think what you're going to feel oftentimes with your career and your next step in life is it's too big. And you know what? It's not. Just find that one thing that you practically can do as your next step and do it. And some days that may be just getting out of bed. Okay, some days it may be just getting out of bed, but take that step. That's the first thing. And the other thing that I was thinking about is, we were talking through a lot of this, is that I think a big hindrance that a lot of what we have when we're interacting with people is fear of judgment. And people do judge quite a bit in the world. I mean, you can see that through social media and everything else. But I think in as much as people judge, people are actually interested to hear what you have to say. And you'd be surprised how it kind of is actually more weighted in the area of people that genuinely want to listen to your thoughts than people who are interested in judging you. So if you have a fear of the way in which you're communicating or what you're saying or what you're saying is going to be wrong or right, start first by saying it. And then you might be surprised that people actually will be receptive and excited to hear what you have to say and take you in that direction. So that's just those two tiny things, the micro step, and people actually will give you the benefit of the doubt. You're in a great place because you're learning. They want to hear what you have to say. You are going to be the leaders of entertainment beyond all of us. It's critical that you shine the light, and we'll help you get there. So
I love that. Thank you. Well, we're at pretty much the 45 marker. So I'm going to start diving into audience cues. And I'm going to actually start with Cara, because there's one directed at you, but if anybody else wants to chime in, it says, what was it like going back to school to become a lawyer? I feel in order to get ahead in the industry, I have to go back to school.
So I would say, well, I had taken 2 years off, and actually for me, it was great. I thought it like, I don't think I could have gone straight through, just because I kind of needed a break, and it was helpful to have the perspective of like having worked for 2 years, even though, obviously it was in an assistant position, but it kind of did give me a different frame. And it was different. It was nice also because it was so different than college. I mean, college was great and I loved it, but it was a different, more self-centered, self-absorbed time, which is supposed to be. But law school was much more focused. I mean, and I feel like those 2 years off had given me sort of a breather to like really be, into it, and like that was all I did. It was like a job going to law school. I met great people, and I had a lot of great professors, and it was intense, but I was glad I did it the way I did it. I don't necessarily think, I mean, it's interesting. I think it's sort of the decision to go back to grad school, though, within the industry, I think is largely driven by sort of, you know, like where you think you want to be. I wouldn't go to law school if you want to become a producer. You know what I mean? Like, I often say this to people, which is not to at all, discourage anyone, but there's that quote from Gilda Radner that at the end of the rat race, you're still a rat. And at the end of law school, you're a lawyer. So if that's what you want to be, great. But you know, you don't want to go to law school, invest the money, spend the time, and then come out and be like, oh, I'm going to parlay that into being a director or producer. Like, if you want to be a director or producer, that's a very distinct path to, you know, to go to Stark or like AFI or one of those other great programs. So many are out there. But I also think that, like, if you're interested in doing, you know, what Ellen's done, what Norman's done, you don't necessarily need to go to school for that either. It's more a matter of like what these two guys have talked about too, in terms of, you know, the winding path and finding the next jobs and also finding mentors. You know, it's all, like you said, it's a relationship-based business, and it's all these different groups of people like BRIC, like Women in Animation, like all these other groups, and sort of finding your way that way.
I love that. And I think, you know, going something that Norman was saying earlier of like different platforms too, of like finding either mentors or, in Cara, to your point, like circles of humans that you can build relationships and networks with. There's like, depending on the direction you want to go, there's tutorials. Like if you're going the art direction route, like there's certificates that you can get. Like it doesn't have to always be a 4-year program. So I think it's, answering the question of what's the goal if I do go to school, and or if I get secondary or above a BA. Norman or Ellen, do you have anything you want to chime in? You don't have to, but there was something.
Well, just the part about mentors, I think the thing is that I think to be open as to what one thinks about as a mentor, because there are people who are your peers who can also be your mentors. I think that I saw an article once that it was sort of like have I think they call it like a kitchen cabinet, like have your group of people who can be your advisors, have people who are at your same level, who like are going through the same things that you are, but of course having their own unique experiences with it. Have somebody who's like 5 years out from where you want to be, who can show you sort of that interim path, sort of that next step that Norman was talking about. And then have somebody who is maybe like really aspirational of where you think you're going to be. Hopefully you can build those relationships. And I think the thing about the relationships part of it is that it takes time, and don't expect things to happen overnight. It's one of the hardest things, I think, because this industry is super casual, but it's still professional. But to build a relationship with somebody, to figure out who you are as a professional person and how you communicate, that's really important. It's not like emailing a friend who's like you're giving your life update to. It's like finding ways. You can use social media for this too, is a really great way to actually stay in touch with little pings without it having to be like, emailing 6 times a year or something. There's a lot of really creative ways. So I think about how you connect with people. Think about, I'm not much of a gardener, honestly, but I think about the garden of like some seeds take a long time to grow. Others are like come to fruition really quickly. But like I got the job at Cyberchase from one of the people who I met in my very first job. And I worked for her when I was a freelancer, like 7 years later. And then a few years after that is when I got Cyberchase. And it was because I stayed in touch and was building that relationship slowly, not thinking about it that strategically, honestly, but that's what happened. So I think it's like you may not feel like in the beginning that you have a lot of power or options, but you do. And all of those people who are your pals now, they're going to be all at these amazing places, and you're going to hire each other and things will happen. And you have, it's the long game. Careers, if you're lucky, your career is long, and you're going to connect with a ton of people.
100%.
I love that.
I totally agree with that on all levels. Every job I've had since it came from connections that like someday I met at Disney, like attenuated, but it all led from that one job.
It's like a connecting the dots. I always relate it to like a game or like Pokemon. You're just like collecting people instead of Pokemons, like as you go along. Anybody can answer this. Kennedy has a question of basically of if you knew then what you know now, sort of thing. So what would you say is something you wish you knew for your current role, or maybe even starting out? Go ahead, Norm. Then.
It takes longer than you think. That's all I'm going to tell you. I think be patient. because I think if you assume right out, most of you, I think you're in high school right now. So you're thinking about college or not thinking about college and going right into the workforce. Just know that it takes a while, and that you're going to fail and succeed multiple times until you feel like you've got your footing in your quote unquote career eventually. That's my retro.
Oh,
I think know that there is a process, and then trust in that process. And like, even the fact that just to know that it's like we all met yesterday to prepare for today. Like, things didn't happen just by magic today. We all showed up and Allison started asking us questions. It was like Sarah and Danny were involved. We had a conversation, they took notes, they made a plan. And today it feels like this wonderful spontaneous thing, but it's not. Just like any talk show or any like talk show content that you watch on media platforms, whatever, that's all pre-interviewed and pre-planned, and they know what they're doing going in. They know all the funny little anecdotes that they're going to tell. Like, that's just all process. And I think for me, that was it seems so obvious when I say this, but truly, I was in college taking an art history class, and I was in Boston, and you had to go to the Museum of Fine Arts. And I just was like, I hadn't gone to a lot of art museums growing up. Like, occasionally, just wasn't my parents' jam, I guess. And I was like, but I liked Van Gogh and I liked Starry Night because it was everywhere. And I didn't know that he did other studies, that he did like he drew that a lot. He drew different versions, then he did studies. And that was really mind blowing to me. And I think that is an aha that I come back to, because like any development process, scripting, it's like you start with an idea and then you work on it and you work and it gets a little bit better. And then you bring it over here because it's actually not quite what you wanted it to be. And you bring it around, and like, there's a process, and the process can work, but you have to be comfortable with discomfort, because when it doesn't feel like it's working, that's not fun. But like, there is a process, and it's imperfect, and everybody knows it's imperfect, and anybody who tells you otherwise is lying. But it's like, it's cool, it's good. It's like, that's how you get to the next step. That's how you keep going.
I love that. Thank you. I'm going to go to Mariana. Do you have any tips to find the right team for small projects? And then what are some main non-creative roles we should look for to help us on succeeding on the business side? I think one or the other based off of time. I think based off of a business kind of support, what roles do you think we should talk? What are all the business support roles in the entertainment space that we can name off? HR, finance,
Everything.
lawyering. Yeah.
Everything a company needs. Everybody, you've got front desk people, you've got accountants, you've got lawyers, you've got who's ordering food for events, you've got licensing, everything that a company needs, you need in entertainment. All that practical stuff.
True.
Love it. Would you say entering the industry with the production business side with goals of moving into the creative animation realm is a good way to get your foot in the door? Or is it more frowned upon? From my experience, I've seen it bite somebody's butt, in a way, if you're like using it as a stepping stone, if you want to be a storyboard artist. And then you go the PA route. Like, I know certain studios I've worked at really frowned, but other studios I've worked at are open to it. What are your all thoughts as being on the hiring side of things?
It's tricky, I feel like, and because I'd like to think, I mean, like, look, on the one hand, I always tell people, if you want to be in this industry, like, just start somewhere, like jump on a lily pad and then see where it leads you. But I do think that it's also tricky. I see at my own company sometimes that even though there's and maybe Ellen and Norman might see it differently, but like, I'm often surprised at like a smaller company like Moonbug that there is still a lot of sort of like oh, this person does this person does that kind of thing. Whereas I'm like, well, they have transferable skills. Why don't we just move them over and have them do this if that's what they want to do? So I do think that, I think there's a possibility of doing it. I think that if you're, I don't know, if you're super art minded and you, like to your example, you want to be a storyboard artist and you know you're sort of headed that way, it probably makes more sense to try to jump in on that sort of side of it. But the thing is, there's the necessity doctrine that dictates that everybody needs a job and wants to start somewhere. So the reality is, even if you jump in and more business and less artistic, you might have to switch companies to make that switch. But I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think so. Two things. One is you're creating a brand. So ultimately, starting out from high school, the way people perceive the choices that you make in your career are going to be sort of snowballed into who you become, when you enter these larger companies. And I think Ellen is right. We're right in terms of the positioning of people, whether they be on the creative side or the business side, but the choice ultimately is up to you, and you can change it anytime you want. So you got to rebrand yourself. You've got to take a different approach to who you are and defining yourself. And once you do that, that'll, hopefully, change things. And I think Kara unfortunately has it precise in terms of like, once you're further along in your career, it is a little harder to make those changes. But you still can. It just takes a big leap overall. So, yeah.
I think I'm fortunate that person that I told you about who hired me on Cyber Chase, that was the first animated show I worked on. And I hadn't done scripted. I had done unscripted and narration, like documentary, informational kind of stuff, but not like a full scripted series, not animation and not games. And when I pointed this out to the person who said, hey, I want you to do this, because she knew me from another job and knew that I was a very hard worker and flexible thinker, I said, I haven't done this. And she's like, you're a good producer. I'll teach you. So I think part of it is like, and I met other people along the way who were like, oh, I see your skills, just the way that Kara was describing. To me, it's like, let that be a process of elimination for you, that it's like, you want to work with the people who are like, I see you. I see what you got. I see you can do this, versus the ones who just want to pigeonhole, whatever. I don't know. To me, somebody who can't see that is not necessarily somebody that I want to work with. And I think that you have to help somebody see. You have to make clear what your skill set is, and you have to have that vision if you're going to start in A, that you legit want to do that and you're interested in it. And you have a vision for how you're going to get to B. A friend of mine did that at Netflix, started on the operations side in some way, I forget, and took had been a producer, wanted to move to LA, work at Netflix, got that job on the operations side, made friends on the creative side, took a demotion really to get to the creative side, and then worked her way back up because she's very creative thinker and very passionate. She was able to make that happen, but it required a lot of like careful planning and listening and being like, I think she probably had a brand, within the organization that worked, that people understood who she was and that she had this vision. But like, I think you can make it happen. It's just sort of, you don't want to pull it. Don't take a job that you intend to leave in 6 months or a year. That's a bummer, because then you might.
I see a lot of entry-level humans around this time spend about 6 months and then jump. And it's like, you can't really have time to build relationships or an understanding of the role when you just hop that quickly. All right, I'm going to combine 3 questions because we have a minute left. So tips for incoming professionals, particular traits or qualities that you look for when hiring a human. And if your parents are on your butt for finding a job after graduation in this climate, like, how do you navigate? So I think they all are kind of wrapped into one in a way. So whoever wants to kind of knowledge share. Okay, Ellen, go for it.
I have one thing I'll say. because I'm in Pittsburgh, I don't have a lot of people who are in the industry, in entertainment industry. There are some, but not as many. So I have to be a very flexible thinker when I'm looking at resumes, and especially for entry level, because nobody else has necessarily done this. So what I look for are certain kinds of jobs and certain kinds of experiences. Number one, camp counselor, waiter or waitress, host, somebody who's worked in a restaurant. I did a mock interview for somebody at my where I went to college, and they said described being like the hostess at a very busy restaurant near campus. And I was like, oh, okay. And in talking to her, I was like, oh yeah, you're very organized, you know how to prioritize. Like, I think always look at job descriptions that for the jobs that you want, look at the verbs that are in there and figure out how you can tell your story for how you have those skills, even if you haven't done that job. But really harvest those verbs and see how they can apply to you. But like camp counselors, waitress, waiter, babysitter, I look for people who have an interest in kids. All of those things, you can demonstrate that you have this passion or this skill.
I look for people, I mean, what always hits me is I love people who really sort of sell the fact that they don't have much of an ego. Do you know what I mean? Because like, especially in the environment I'm in now, everybody does everything. Like I may be the highest ranking lawyer, but I'm still drafting basic deals. Like we all jump in and firefight all the time. So to me, that's a big thing too, is like nobody's too precious, nothing's too big or too small. Sort of like your friend, you know, who just like switched and went, you know what I mean, and was able to adjust. That's something I look for in any capacity that I'm hiring in.
Yeah, and I would say for me, the most important thing is that you prove yourself as a generator. I think you just your ability to see something through and have it completed and demonstrate that success is really, really important, because we need that skill when you join us. So yeah.
And I think like in a downturn of a market like we are in right now, and you're graduating into it, and if your parents are giving you a hard time, you'll have to, just like if you're a professional right now out of work, you just are going to have to figure out what is that like gap for right now. Like, are you going to work retail and then do like shorts with friends on the side? It's like to continue building it up. But so it's a little bit of a yes and like, okay, well, you graduated, downturn of a market. There may not be a lot of opportunities directly associated into our entertainment space, but you still have to start making rent or something. So you're going to have to find a job, but that doesn't mean you'd stop trying to achieve your goals. So I think anybody that stops, I think we talked about ingenuity, perseverance, like those are all really important kind of aspects to have on your forefront of the mind as you navigate probably in now through a couple of years. All right, well, we didn't answer all, we had 2 left, but I think we did pretty well. I want to thank the 3 of you for hanging out with me this morning, a little bit in your afternoon, Ellen. And thank you to the audience, no matter where you are in the world. We appreciate you attending as well. Thank you very much and see you all soon.
Reach out on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Say
totally.
you watched
This is super fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having
Thank
us.
you.